Hello to everyone on the call. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to ICOF's Peer Learning Series. This is Michele Wallstrom. Today's call is part of our year-long, mostly monthly learning series. These calls feature colleagues who would like to share their experiences with you on the month's topic. A full listing of the monthly topics and recordings of past calls can be found by logging into the Iowa Council of Foundations website under the Community Foundations tab and CF links. For today's topic, we will hear from several colleagues about what they learned from a variety of sessions held during the Kansas Association of Community Foundations National Conference for Growing Community Foundations. These sessions included topics ranging from executive transitioning to working with donor families to board engagement. We have 5 colleagues with us today, and first we're going to hear from Jenna Manders, who's the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque's Knowledge Management Director, and then Laura Booth, Donor Relations Officer, and Christy Smead, Development Assistant, who are both with the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. Then after that, Dave Lewis, Executive Director of the Community Foundation of Johnson County, and then finally, Carrie McCann-Botel, Iowa Council of Foundations President. Let's just see what's going on here. Sorry, I'm having an issue with my computer. So let's go ahead and get started now. As always, we'd ask you to mute your phone and then, of course, unmute it when you're going to ask a question. We'll hear from all of the speakers first, and then I will open it up to participants to ask questions at the end. So first we're going to start with Jenna Manders, so I will turn it over to Jenna now. Jenna?
Thanks, Michele. I've been asked to talk about 3 of the sessions I went to, so I'm going to start with Growing Your Assets Through Youth Philanthropy. And this was a session put on by the Oak Park Community Foundation. And the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque has a youth philanthropy model, as do a number of community foundations at the state. So I would just say I'm going to share what we learned from Oak Park. But if you're curious more, I know Carrie and Michele have a network of youth philanthropy organizations, so we'd be happy to talk more. And one thing we had learned from Oak Park specifically is that they actually do 2 cohorts of 50 of students, so 25 in each cohort. In their first year, they're eligible as juniors and seniors. So as juniors, they really go through the process of making grants, so learning about the community, and then ultimately making grants. And the seniors actually then raise all of the money that the juniors grant out. And I thought this was an interesting model because they're really creating the buy-in the junior year to then the senior year kind of take their skills one step further. And the interesting things that I saw that their foundation was doing for that fundraising was a letter writing campaign. They were allowing their kids meeting one-on-one with donors, and most of those donors that they had meetings with were from like a women's philanthropy group, so in Dubuque that would be our Women's Giving Circle, and also giving presentations to community groups, so Kiwanis, Rotary, etc. And those are some of the things we're bringing back to Dubuque, is looking at, do we have a joint meeting of our youth philanthropy with our Women's Giving Circle, and our foundation staff already does presentations to community groups, so do we alternate with some youth philanthropy kids and assessing level of comfort. So those are some things we'll be considering going forward that were takeaways for us. And the next session I wanted to touch base on was a sample stewardship plan that's working. And this one was from a community foundation in Indiana called Grant County. And she did a couple sessions, but some immediate takeaways I had were doing less better. And what she had said is she doesn't like to do bulk mail. She has targeted groups instead that receive more personal mail, and her groups are all less than 50 people, and there's different segments. And she has been doing this since 2013 and has been tracking this and can show what mailings resulted in what outcomes. They've done Welcome to the Family mailings to new donors, which has resulted in new funds being set up. And each staff member on the team is really assigned a group, from their front desk person who would be assigned new donors to their CFO who's assigned professional advisors. I think they had an office of 6. And their communications person. And each person is assigned different days to post on social media and really focus on communications. and that has increased their followers, and they really think that's just because different voices versus the same voice being heard on those communications. In the last section one of the other sections I went to that I'm talking about today is the executive transition planning for your community foundation, and this is another foundation out of Indiana that presented. And I think there's a lot of key takeaways from this session that I think were addressed at Connect, so I wanted to keep it pretty high level, but again, willing to answer questions. And they said kind of some key things to do is to really survey the board and staff when you're thinking about executive transition planning, and what areas is the community foundation functioning well, what areas could be improved, and getting that from your board and staff levels. And then succession planning is only for a planned departure, but also unplanned departure or a temporary long-term absence. So if there's a sickness or accident, something along those lines, that there's a plan in place. And not just planning for a CEO, but senior staff members too. So some general preparedness questions to ask yourself: should there be an interim? How much time they'll be allowing a departing CEO to spend with a successor? What talents or experience are you specifically looking for in a CEO? Is the search process going to be local, national, regional? Where to advertise? And then some quick statistics that they gave were 30% of C-suite roles. So you're thinking you're a CEO, maybe your president, vice president of your finance department, operations, that type of thing, are filled by internal candidates in the nonprofit sector, where that's 50% or more in the for-profit world. So there's a leadership deficit happening in nonprofits that they're not grooming those candidates. And they say that an external hire takes 2 times as long to become productive. So those are just some key points that they made from a financial perspective. And pitfalls that they often see in executive planning is ignoring the plan and settling for a new hire. So those are just some of the things we took away, and again, happy to answer questions. But those are my initial thoughts.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you, Jenna. Next, I'll turn it over to Laura and Christy to share what they learned in a couple of their sessions at the conference.
Thank you. I actually attended a session by the same person as Jenna. So her sample stewardship plan that's working was taught by the same person that taught time, talent, treasure, and testimony. So to piggyback on Jenna's, I'm going to jump into that one first. Like Jenna said, her motto was do less, better. She said to really start your planning with your left brain first to fill in the information you have to have. Then strategically focus on using your right brain to fill in the creativity so that you make things people want to read. Every single piece before you send it out, stop and ask yourself, is it stamp worthy? Is it worth putting that stamp on? Remind yourself all the time that we work with the most generous people and grant to the most deserving nonprofit. Like Jenna said, they do create their targeted audience, and then once they create those targeted audiences, they reach out for special touches to the top 50 in that group. Those special touches are created and assembled in-house. So remember, you can get more creative because you're only making 50 of them. Her example was she made a thank you card where they literally glued on little capes because that year they were running a superhero theme. So they sent a little superhero card with hot glued capes on those 50 donors special cards. Create a new acknowledgement letter with a new story each month so they want to read it. And the other thing they do with acknowledgement letters that's unique is they actually fold it in half instead of a third, so it looks more like a greeting card and less like a bill. She recommended looking at your donors as a secondary layer of marketing and focus on spending time on engaging donors that want to be engaged with you. The last really big takeaway I took from hers was to think outside of the box for your annual report and send it to everyone. They actually insert their annual report which is a small, very quick overview with the basics that they need, but not a lot of extra stuff. They put it in their local newspaper as an insert, so everybody in the community receives their annual report.
Right. I'll start with, I attended the Dollars and Cents, Building a Bond Between Finance and Development, and the session was presented by Jim Gustafson and Jason Kennedy from the Nebraska Community Foundation. And the biggest thing I took away was it's important to have both a gift acceptance policy and a gift acceptance procedure. The policy accomplished defining what your community foundation will accept. It makes it easier for your community foundation to say no, and it covers due diligence needs. And the procedures, they define each department and individual's responsibilities. It defines what information each department needs, provides the process for communication between departments, and defines when the advice or professional needs to be sought, and provides steps to make sure due diligence is covered.
The last session that we're presenting on is tips for transforming your board into a strategic partner and fundraising ally, and that was presented by Neil Harjara, President and CEO of the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation. He stated that you will get what you put in from your board, and recommends having a duty of loyalty conversation with them for the best interest of the community foundation each year. He broke down their strategic plan for their board into 4 segments, and with the first was philosophy. And that was really kind of taking a moment to think about what are you giving your directors in return for their service? Are they getting a warm feeling from helping with grants? It doesn't have to be a tangible item, but what are they receiving in return for the service they're providing you? The plan, label each section of your board packet with where it aligns with your goals and your strategic plan. Instead of just giving them a bunch of information, actually keep labeling it to tie it back to where it goes to the strategic plan and your goals and why that piece is important for them to know. With expectations, he said establish expectations for the board as a whole. Encourage your board members to wear their community foundation name tags when they attend other functions within the area, so they're constantly representing you and your organization. Make their board bio about their community involvement, not a professional biography. And have your directors physically sign to a commitment form each year. With recruitment, they have ongoing activity for recruitment all year long. They don't just recruit seasonally. They are constantly looking for new board members. They try to make it competitive so that people want to serve on the board and are asking them if they can be on the board. They suggest meeting with prospects before board vote and not mentioning board service, but present it as a volunteer opportunity to get them on a committee first and kind of test them out, and let those prospective people, whether they're somebody you're meeting with or is coming to you, make sure they know that there is a waiting list. Those were the key points from our session.
Great. Thank you, Laura and Christy, for sharing there. Dave Lewis, we'll move on to you to share what you learned in some of your sessions.
Thank you very much. I visited the session on developing resilient communities, and that was really dealing with the aftermath of disasters. And one of the interesting things that I first heard was how important pre-planning was. And as a tongue-in-cheek comment, they talked about the hurricanes this last summer. Not a real funny subject, but it was dramatic how different the response as far as philanthropy to Houston versus Florida versus Puerto Rico, and they each one dropped off almost exponentially as they happened. So the tongue-in-cheek message is if you're going to have a disaster, be the first one. And then beyond that, though, as we think about the planning piece that we really need to think about, is that the experience that past disasters has shown is that you have about 3 or 4 days of availability to capture the spotlight. So you need to be ready to accept those contributions. Otherwise, you're going to miss out. So they recommended some things like having the plan in place, the fund already set up, the pre-written letters, pre-written press releases is actually what I meant to say rather than letters. But getting as much of that information ready and cookie cutter, insert the appropriate terms, dates, issues, whatever, and then be able to push that out will help dramatically. They refer to the disaster life cycle. The first 1 to 3 days is really the time that you have to access philanthropy from outside the area, because after that, people will move on to other issues. The news of the day will change. But, of course, you have the next 3 years or more that you'll just spend in recovery. And, the Cedar Rapids community, the Iowa City community, we completely understand that after living through the floods that we've been through. But so a lot of pre-planning is necessary there. I should back up. One of the good resources that you can all find on the website would be the two presenters. One was Nancy Beers, and she's from the Early Recovery Fund Midwest section. And if you simply Google Early Recovery Fund, the website will come up, and a great deal of resources are available there. The other presenter was Brian Fogel of the Community Foundation of the Ozarks. And, of course, being a person living in Missouri, they also experienced quite a few with the tornadoes and those types of things. So a lot of good information from them. Some of the takeaways that Brian brought to us was to really set yourself up as the even-handed convener. And it was his idea with the pre-written press releases and those types of things. One thing he said that many times people overlook is the necessity to prepare for the disaster for pets, because we all worry about the people, but it often turns into a huge problem because we don't have a way to take care of the pets, and that spills over into other issues. And in his community fund, after their huge tornado, they chose to waive the fee on the disaster funds. That just a point that he made that may be something that you'd want to pre-think about if that's what you want to do or not. There were some other resources that you can reach out to. The CDP Disaster Playbook is on that website I just gave you. There's a company called TechSoup that also offers support in this area. Think about mutual support, working with the other community foundations that are around you, other community organizations, volunteer organizations, and really to avoid getting into case management. What you want to do is be the funder and the convener, but you don't want to be the case manager. And that's pretty much the highlights of that particular session. The other session I visited was the top 10 ways to position your community foundation to serve philanthropic families. And this was put on by Tony Macklin, National Center for Family Philanthropy. Many of you have probably heard his name before because he came to Iowa for the boot camp that I was in just not too long ago, so it was the second time I got to see him. But he has top 10 list of ways to serve these families. And I'm just going to run through them real quick. The first one is really make sure that you have your basics in order, that you have you got the core donor stewardship activities, and then you're ready to start maybe trying out some of the intermediate services that you might, getting donors to site visits and education services, facilitating family meetings, some of those kinds of things. He suggested a website, which is the Community the Chester County Community Foundation. Their website is chescocf.org. So it's chescoff.org. And they have some resources on their website that might help you look into this if this is something you're interested in. Point number 2 is be clear about your primary goals for adding family philanthropy. Have a case statement for it up front. Think about what the investment capacity is as far as funds and also personnel to make it work for the long term. Number 3, have internal alignment around the metrics so that you can tell whether this is a successful program or not. Number 4, create clear pricing structure, because you got to figure out a way that you're going to fund this. And really there were a couple different funding models. One was simply an hourly rate of something maybe in the neighborhood of $100 to $125 per hour. The other was the Atlanta, Seattle, and Houston use a basis point fee structure. Number 5, develop an internal culture that is really toward the idea of advising more than sales. So set yourself up as a consultant or a facilitator. Number 6, create an intake for onboarding process that involves the broader family. So set up the expectations early, visit with the next generation of givers, and what the expectations are for ongoing interaction. Number 7, develop quick access to trusted partners. So build those relationships ahead of time with the wealth advisors in the community, the legal advisors, the other organizations that would be useful to you. Number 8, start with a few early win tools. Some of the easier things to start with that really would give you some feel of whether this is moving forward in a direction that will work for you. And that would be setting up family site visits, bringing in outside speakers, philanthropic audit plan process, customizing grant making for the individual families. Number 9, develop staff skills and knowledge in such topics as discernment, facilitation, or coaching family systems theory, and that's I think the author and a fairly prolific author in that area is Bowen, B-O-W-E-N. And integration of family dynamics, community building, and adult education, because the facilitators are going to need to know how to really put these events together. And last, 10, and this is optional if there's demand, is to develop internal skills and processes to help families tackle deeper challenges such as governance, decision-making, communications, conflict resolution, achieving durable consensus, succession, and power dynamics. And that is the top 10 ways to position your community foundation to serve philanthropic families. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Dave, for sharing all of that information. And then lastly, we'll have Carrie talk about some of the sessions that she attended.
Good morning, everyone. The first session I'm going to share some feedback on is practical tips for community foundation board engagement. And that session was facilitated by Mike Batchelor. He's the executive director of the Erie Community Foundation. And he has been in his role for over 20 years, so he had lots of good insights, and we honestly didn't make it through his whole presentation because we had lots of examples and conversation in that room. So one thing we did spend a lot of time on is the importance of having a governance committee. He advised that the governance committee can really do a lot of the work to keep the board on track throughout the year. So a couple of specific responsibilities is really just holding individual board members and the whole board accountable. One way to do that is by performing annual board assessments on the full board and also individual board member assessments, and then really bringing that information back to the board for discussion and dialogue around how they can make improvements moving forward. The next thing a governance committee can do is help to orient new board members. He really stressed the importance of engaging not only the governance committee in this work, but also longtime board members with the new board members coming in to start to form some good relationships between longstanding board members and new board members. The governance committee can also support board education. So if there's topics that the staff of the community foundation want to bring to the board, the governance committee can help facilitate those educational opportunities throughout the year. And then finally, the governance committee can help support the CEO evaluation process, which we all know is a very important annual activity. A couple of the other tips and tricks that he shared is to avoid boring reports. I think we all probably try to do that. But one thing he mentioned is strategically engaging community foundation staff members throughout the board meeting. So I know a few members of the audience at this session were asking if it's appropriate to bring your full staff or what staff members to bring into the board meeting. And he advised just strategically inviting individual staff members into meetings throughout the year to share highlights of their work or highlights of work that's important at certain times of the year. So just think about how you're engaging your full staff to build those relationships instead of just having the executive director or CEO in those meetings. And then the final thing that I wanted to share is really just to avoid groupthink, and the strategy that they use at the Erie Community Foundation is breaking into smaller groups during their strategic or generative discussions. He said that that has worked really well in getting maybe some of the quieter board members or less experienced board members to really open up and share their ideas in the small group format, and then they pull back together as the whole board and share out what they discussed in their small group. So just an idea as you think about those strategic conversations. The second session that I was going to share some feedback from was making a real difference in your rural economy. And that session was with Brian Fogel with the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, Jeff Yost with the Nebraska Community Foundation, and then two facilitators. And I think that the overall theme of the session is really thinking about community foundations as economic drivers in the philanthropic gifts that they're stewarding, but also the community projects and activities that they can help make happen. One specific example, and I can't recall the community that this happened in, I'd be happy to follow up if someone's really interested, is that a community foundation made a grant to a school so the school could purchase a grocery store that was closing in their small rural community. After that purchase, there were classes that students could take to run and facilitate the operations of that grocery store. And, of course, the students were then building a variety of employment skills, but also the community didn't lose their grocery store, which is sort of this win-win model for the community foundation, for the school district, and for the economy. The model was so successful that they have since granted a second and a third grant for the students to open a deli out of the grocery store so they can now cater events throughout the community. And this third grant that they'll be receiving is to expand to open a coffee shop in their community. So, of course, these programs are run with limited hours when the students are available. But, you know, that's three small businesses that are providing services and goods to their communities that may not exist without the investment of the community foundation or without the leadership of the school district and teachers and students in that building. So love that example. I know that the Community Foundation of the Ozarks is the one who gave those grants. I just can't remember the specific community. So somewhere in Missouri. And then the next thing that Jeff Yost really talked about is investing in economic development projects in partnership with local community economic development offices. So we've talked actually a lot this year through some of our ICOF programming about creative placemaking, about working in partnership with those local economic development offices, maybe to start a fund or to partner on a community project. There have been countless examples of that looking really good in Nebraska and being really successful. One example that they shared specifically was about the community of Red Cloud, Nebraska. They did a community needs assessment and determined that quality child care was their highest priority. So then their community foundation and economic development department worked in partnership to identify public and private funding sources and braid those funds together to open a high quality child care system as well. So really enjoyed both of those sessions and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks, Carrie, for that good information, and to all the speakers for sharing information from each of your sessions. And I'll just open it up to any participants on the call that have any questions regarding any of the sessions that you've heard about, or how you can get more information, or have somebody repeat the names of the speakers if you want to try and get connected with them in a different way as well. So does anyone have any questions they'd like to share?
This is Randy Kuhlman in Fort Dodge. I was just wondering, do you know if the folks in Kansas, are they posting any of the slide presentations or anything like that on their website?
That's a good question, Randy. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to ask the participants to see if they know from having looked and what they said at the conference. Carrie, do you know?
Yeah, I know that they recorded all of the sessions, at least audio. I'm not sure about video. And I know that they'll be posted and available to people who attended. I'm not quite sure if they'll be sort of open source on the KACF website, but I can certainly check and follow up with this group.
Thank you.
And I would just follow up on for that same line of thinking that Randy is talking about, which is if some of the speakers, if you would just talk about whether you feel like it was really beneficial, and just like if you feel like affiliates would also benefit, or what kind of affiliates. Specifically, I'm thinking, Jenna, I know that you've had a lot of affiliates, staff, and volunteers attend in the past, and just wondering if you still feel like there's sessions that are offered really for all ranges of folks in a community foundation setting, or who specifically you think from community foundations should attend.
Yeah, this is Jenna, and I can start with that question. I would say, so this is my third year attending this conference. And we've sent, I think, people for 4 to 5 years from the foundation, usually 1 or 2 a year. And last year we actually did receive a grant through ICOF, did a capacity building grant to take each of our affiliate staff. So we have contract employees in each of our 7 affiliates. And I would say, yes, it's hugely beneficial both for community foundation core staff as well as our affiliate staff members who are really focusing on donor relations and maybe professional advisors or just board. And the reason I would say that is because each hour or session of the conference, so some sessions are an hour and a half, 2 hours, but each session has, I think, at least 6 different offerings. And within each of those offerings, different levels of offerings, so beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And they are anything from finance to board to maybe even a rural focus. Really just any different category. And one of the things I would say specifically about this year, so when I first started, they were just the Kansas conference, where now this is really an annual conference for what they consider growing community foundations, and they have a great rural focus. So I think this year they really hit it out of the park with their sessions and bringing in speakers from all across the country who have really different sized community foundations, different models, and it's a great way to not only learn from other foundations, speakers, but also network and make those relationships with people outside of Iowa.
This is Dave. I'd like to add a little bit to that. As the new guy, I was initially advised that I probably didn't want to go to this until I'd been in the seat for a year or so. But then, like a month before the conference, I talked to somebody else who said they had gone to a conference fairly earlier in their career, and it really made a big difference for them. And I found that the latter is the case, that I really gained a huge amount of insight by being here. And as was mentioned before, there were all these different tracks, and I struggled mightily trying to figure out which track I wanted to be in, because there were so many good pieces of information that seemed applicable to somebody who is in an executive director seat, somebody who's in a fundraiser seat, somebody who's in administrative, or somebody who really works behind the scenes. Even there were so many great opportunities. I think that just about anybody could come away with something. I also found that there were a lot of board members who were there, and some of them were very small community foundations who the board members were really doing most of the work, and some of them were larger community foundations where board members were just trying to get a better understanding of how their community foundation could have an impact on their community. And the big takeaway for me was to see about getting my board and maybe some of my community fund board members to attend these things. I think that's a very good conference.
This is Laura Booth. I would agree to expand on what they've said. With each session, they were not only organized by what department they were applicable to, or potentially what role I think they did lift up leadership positions, but also then sorted them into level of complexity. So some of the sessions for, let's say, governance were basic, and some were intermediate, and some were advanced. So for each department, there was a variety of different depths of the information. So, somebody like Dave had the opportunity to decide, am I focusing on more on basic? Am I jumping into intermediate? Whereas I was able to say, okay, is this something I want basic? Is it intermediate? So we could each look at it from our own place of where we were and what we wanted to expand on and what topics and what complexity. So I really enjoyed it as well.
Great. Thank you for everybody for sharing that information. And if there's no more questions, I'll just open it up for anybody that has any other questions for a few seconds here. Okay, since there's no other questions, I'll just say thank you to our speakers today, Jenna, Laura, Christy, Dave, and Carrie, for sharing with us your takeaways from the National Conference for Growing Community Foundations. And then just let everybody know that the Peer Learning Series will resume in 2018, and you can look for information in the December CF Snapshot e-newsletter, where we'll put information in there regarding the next date and topic for the series. So thank you all for joining us on the call, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.